Hello folks, Alex here. This is Alex Unabridged, and today I'm going to talk about my top 10 fiction books. So, welcome back if that's the case. Yes, today I thought I would start a little series, just going through some of my top 10s or possibly top 5s in some categories, of various different sorts of books that I love. So I thought we'll start with the top 10 fiction, and then I plan to do a few little videos, so my top non-fiction, my top comics and graphic novels, my top plays, and my top art books. So yes, we will start with the fiction today. In at number 10 is The Hobbit. Bit of fantasy to start with. So yes, for anybody who's not aware of the story, the general gist is this is the story of Bilbo Baggins and his adventure, the Hobbit of the title, and he joins Gandalf and Thorin Oakenshield's company of dwarves on their mission to reclaim their home from Smaug the dragon. Smaug or Smorg, or however you pronounce it. I read this for the first time about 15 years ago. Didn't read it as a kid, but I kind of went, not bothered about the Lord of the Rings and all that malarkey before the films. And even when the films first came out, I was a bit like, don't care. And my wife loves them, absolutely loves them, and showed me the extended editions of the films, and I just fell in love with them. And then, kind of wanted more Middle Earth stuff, so picked up The Hobbit. And I like it because it's a good, quick story. It's a nice introduction to Middle Earth, and to elements of Tolkien's writing style as well, in terms of it's quite straightforward, and it's got some songs in it and stuff like that, which obviously come up in abundance in Lord of the Rings. I also like the fact it's a quest. I do like a quest story. It's lots of walking, and kind of landscape and stuff like that as well. It's you get to kind of really experience the world that they're walking through and that kind of thing. So yeah, that is number 10. In at number 9 is Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco. This is a thriller, mystery, historical fiction. It's hard to put a genre on it, really, I think. If you don't know the story of it, it follows three book editors, one in particular, but three of them, who are rather disillusioned somewhat by the fact that they spend a lot of their time, spend way too much of their time, reviewing sort of crackpots theories and conspiracy theories and fanatical kind of manuscripts on things like the occult, and things like the Freemasons and Illuminati and Rosicrucians, Templars, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, they're a bit kind of about the amount of stuff they've had to kind of go through from some rather crackpot authors. So they decide to have a little bit of fun, and so they come up with a plan that they want to connect all of these kind of esoteric conspiracy theory kind of weirdness, from the authors of the books that they edit, that they review, and use the same sort of insane logic as these authors, and see what they get. They begin to feed these kind of bits of knowledge and information into this computer that's capable of inventing connections between all the various entries, and they believe they're just kind of playing this fun game, and yet the game starts to get away from them, and it turns into kind of a thriller, murder, mystery type thing. I first read it probably about 12, 13 years ago, something like that, and I loved it. It was my first introduction to Umberto Eco. It's not necessarily the easiest Eco to pick up, although none of them are easy. And that's one reason why I like it. It is a challenge. There is difficult language and very kind of arcane and esoteric references. You want to keep a dictionary handy, and you want to be ready with Google to search and research some references. But I like that because it does encourage you to go off and learn more about the things that Echo's talking about. It's dry in its wit, which I do like. It can be a rather academic and intellectual at times. Echo's work is all like that. He was an academic, a semiotician, so I think that's kind of bound to come in. But at its core, it is a thriller and a mystery, I think. It definitely inspired me to go and research a lot of the things in it, particularly the secret societies and the occult, which I've always had a little bit of a fascination with. And despite its difficulty, and it did take me a long time to get through this, and this copy is underlined to the max, I just find it totally enthralling. To the point of, I remember reading it on the way back from work once when I used to work in Manchester and get the train home, which is about half an hour's train journey from Manchester Centre. And I got so thoroughly into it that I suddenly looked up and realised the train was pulling out of my stop, of my village. And so, I missed getting off the train, which is very unlike me. And so I basically just had to ride down to the end of the line, which is kind of another 15-20 minutes away, and then ride back again to get home, which, to be honest, I didn't really mind too much because it just meant that I could keep reading. But it really did just suck me in, and really it made me work for it, but it was totally worth it. In at number 8 is The Exorcist. So a bit of horror, first bit of horror on my list. So it follows Chris McNeil and her usually quite sort of sweet daughter Reagan, 11-year-old Reagan. And Chris starts to experience difficulties with Reagan. She becomes afflicted with sort of convulsions, amnesiac moments, episodes, and then things abruptly worsen. And the doctors can't figure out what's wrong with her. So in desperation, Chris turns to a troubled priest and psychiatrist called Damien Karras. Karras recognises that something's really not right with Reagan. So on his recommendation, the church brings in another priest, Father Merrin, to perform an exorcism. I first read it probably over 20 years ago now, probably when I was about 19 or 20. And I had seen the film. I'd seen the film when it was re-released the year I was 18. It was the first 18 movie I went to see, and it was one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made in terms of going to the cinema to see something. It absolutely terrified me. So I read it mainly to try and sort of try and get over that fear, and actually found in book form that I really liked it. It still scared the pants off me, but because I could censor the visuals enough in my head, it didn't actually make things worse. It actually made them better. And it made me understand that it was the visuals of the film that I was scared of, not the concepts behind it. The film to me was scary, and I don't do well with scary. But the book is disturbing. And I can deal with disturbing because I don't know why. I can deal with much more disturbing, darker stuff in books than I can with just a visual scary thing. Something that scares me in terms of the look of it or the sound of it even. I think that was with the film The Exorcist. It was the sound as well that really got to me. It's a really chilling book, and at the time when I read it as well, even having seen the film, it was quite shocking. It is quite extreme in places. So it's quite a challenging. It was quite a challenging read for me, but I've read it multiple times, and it's one of those that I still don't fully understand how I can deal with the book and not the film. But at this point, I don't really need to know that. All I need to know is that I like the book. So yeah, it's one of those that really just kind of, I wouldn't say entertained or anything. It's not that. I think it's more about the lessons it taught me about my kind of reactions to horror movies versus horror books. And it's just quite an enthralling story. It's one of those where you kind of, you want to stop reading but you can't stop reading. Okay, in at number 7 is The Minotaur Takes a Cigarette Break by Stephen Sherrill. In terms of genre-wise, I think this is it's magic realism. I think this would probably put it in that. It's the story of it is, we're following the Minotaur. We're following the Minotaur, originally from the Greek myth, Theseus and the Minotaur and the labyrinth and all of that. And the Minotaur has been out of the labyrinth for 5,000 years. He's now known as M. And he lives in the American South. He lives in a trailer park and he works as a cook in a steakhouse. He's undergone somewhat of a transformation over those 5,000 years. Elements of his appearance still remain. He's still got, the kind of the bovine features and horns and, but psychologically he's changed a lot and he now has very human needs. His appearance makes him an outsider, and so he has to constantly deal with being ostracised and rejected, and he's immortal, so he's experienced this again and again and again, so he keeps and has done over many centuries, so he's perpetually kind of experiencing rejection and loss and stuff like that. This was given to me as a gift by a supervisor I had when I was doing postgrad studies, who became a really good friend, and it was just before I transitioned, so it was about 17 years ago now, and it really just it struck a chord. It's like it did have me in tears, this one. I think it was just quite, I read it at the right time. I like it because it's got really beautiful prose. Cheryl's a poet as well, and it shows, definitely. It's slow paced, which I don't often go for. I often like stuff quite pacey, quite thrilling. But the pace of this just feels right. It just, it suits the story really well. It's melancholy, again, which is not something I usually go for, but I think it's the writing style, and the story is just intriguing. The character of M and the other characters in it, they're intriguing and they're rich characters. It's the first thing that I think I ever read that was written third person present tense, which took me a while to get into in terms of reading it. And it's not a style I'd usually go for, but it works with this one most definitely. And mainly it's, it is about alienation and the need for kind of human connection. And it presents those themes really well. And as I say, I think it just struck a nerve with me when I first read it. So that's my pick for number 7. In at number 6 is Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris. We follow Clarice Starling, who's a young FBI trainee, who is sent in to interview Hannibal Lecter, Hannibal the Cannibal, who is in the Baltimore State Hospital for the criminally insane. And so she goes in for his, to talk to him, to try and get his understanding and assistance, essentially, in understanding and ultimately catching another serial murderer, Buffalo Bill, who's been behind a series of murders of women. I read this last year for the first time. I'd seen the film, which I'd liked, but I prefer the book, definitely. I like the pacing of the book more. I think it explores things further than the film can. And, you know, the characters are certainly Starling and Lecter, but certainly Starling, I think, is just... as well as Jodie Foster did with that part in the film, the book version of Starling, I think, is just richer, and one of my favourite characters, I think. I really like the suspense and tension in it. It's got a great tone to it. There's a darkness to the tone that I really like. The prose is engaging. The relationship that forms between Starling and Lecter is quite a fascinating one, and yeah, the character of Buffalo Bill is a particularly detestable serial killer. I mean, they're all pretty detestable in whatever book you read, but Buffalo Bill is one that really just got to me. It is one of those that just kind of hooked me and kept me reading. So that is my pick for number 6. In at number 5, we have The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This is historical fiction, mystery, thriller, again. I do like my mystery thriller type things. This is set in Barcelona in 1945, and we follow Daniel, who is the son of a book dealer. And his dad takes him to this kind of mysterious, secretive, labyrinthine library called the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, where he's allowed to pick one book, which he essentially becomes the protector of, the steward of. And he finds solace in the book that he's picked, or that perhaps picked him, called The Shadow of the Wind, hence the title. And it's written by an author called Julian Carax. So he sets out to find out more about the author, Carax, and more works that he's written, but finds to his surprise that someone's been systematically destroying all copies of Julian Carax's books. In fact, the one that Daniel has may well be the last one left. And so his what started off as quite an innocent quest kind of takes a bit of a strange turn, and really kind of opens up a door into a quite a dark secret. For me, it's like I love it because it's another one like with Foucault's Pendulum. It's a story about books. It's a book about books and a story within a story. And I do love that kind of thing. I do love the use of books and libraries and things like that in my fiction. It's something that always draws me in. I really like the setting of this. This isn't the usual sort of thing that I would read. That my mum suggested I read this, and I kind of all right, I'll give it a go, and then loved it. It's got great characters in it. Characters are, as you might know by now, important to me. As I say, you've got mystery elements. It is mysterious. It kind of made me want to keep reading. And there's kind of a romance to it as well. Not as in romance in it, although there is, but there's a romance in terms of the tone to it, I think is how I'd put it. It's very imaginative. It's just one of those. It's one of those that kind of, despite the fact it's got some darkness and a bit of mystery and thriller type stuff to it, it's one of those that's kind of like, for me, like warm and fuzzy. It's one of those. It's a comfort read for me, this one, and I did enjoy the others in the series as well. So yes, that is my pick for number 5. In at number 4 is the first of 2 Stephen Kings that are on this list. I did limit myself to 2. I'll do a separate list of top 10 Stephen Kings. So yes, this one is The Shining. Again, I think it's probably one that pretty much everybody knows now. Even if it's the basic premise from the Kubrick film as well. So it's Jack Torrance, who takes a caretaker's job at the Overlook Hotel for off-season, so when there's no one there, and stays there with his wife and his son, Danny. And the hotel's in the mountains of Colorado, and of course, inevitably, they get snowed in, and they get trapped in, and strange and terrible things happen. I first read this when I was 16. It was my first Stephen King, and I read it whilst on holiday in a hotel in the mountains, which certainly helped with the reading experience, I think. It was also my first horror novel, so again, it has, a special place in my heart for that, because up until then I thought I didn't like horror. I thought I'd never be able to read horror, because my own experience had been with horror movies, and I hated them because they scared me too much. And actually, I love horror. I just had to find the right medium. So yeah, I love the setting, the fact that the Overlook itself is a character, basically, in the story. Particularly like the topiary animals. That scared the hell out of me. When I first read it, the idea of these things that would gradually creep up on you when your back was turned. The idea of being trapped in this big hotel, the fact that the hotel becomes quite claustrophobic when you're trapped there, and there's only when there's only 3 people, essentially. It goes from being this big open space to being this very kind of like ominous, oppressive kind of place. For this one, it was it just again, it sucked me in, and scared me just enough to have fun with it, but not so much that it gave me nightmares for months. So yes, that one will always hold a special place for me because it was my first. In at number 3, we're sticking with Stephen King, and we're going for It. So this, again, it's widely known, but for anybody who doesn't know, it follows the experiences of a group of children as they're terrorised by an evil entity thing that plays on the fears of its victims, and it often appears in the form of Pennywise the clown, to attract its prey. It's told through narratives alternating between 2 different time periods, one when the kids are kids, and then again several years later when they've all grown up. I first read it in 2020 to completion. I had started it before that, but hadn't finished it, and I had it as one of the first audiobooks that I ever had, and that, I think, was what really got me with it. It's like I got totally lost in that book. It's a chunky book anyway. It's long. It took me a while to get through it, but it was the fact that it was being read to me. Again, that's the ultimate horror experience for me. So why do I like it? It's about fear, and fear is a quite a significant thing, I think. Certainly to me, it's fear is something that I struggle with, and so to have this thing about being about fear and using fear against its victims, that really kind of grabbed me and scared me, but it certainly fascinated me. I really like the imagery in it. I really like the descriptions of the things that it uses as a disguise for the kids, for the various different people. I love the characters in it. I think the kids are fantastic. I can identify with several of them, but I think Ben probably the closest. It's this small group dynamic of the kids, the survival of as a group of outsiders as well. I really, really loved. I think, you know, as scary as it is, the as in the entity. You know, some of the real more disturbing parts for me were the human characters, the human villains in it, because, you know, they are more scary than some sort of supernatural entity. You know, they are human beings, and there are some real vile characters in this. I really also enjoyed like what in the book are the Derry interludes, where you get some history of the appearances of it over you know, many years, like well before the kids were born. You know, you get some history of Derry, where it's the fictional town where it's set, Derry, Maine, and yeah, you get to like kind of learn bits of history about its kind of appearance and stuff like that. So I really liked that element of it. I think the pacing in the book is really good. I really enjoyed it. And it's one of, again, I just got completely lost in the story, absolutely thoroughly lost in the story. And I was reading it kind of primarily at night. And I think that always helps with horror for me. If I read it at night time, it sucks me in a lot more. But it's one of those where I really, you know, kind of just was almost kind of half living it in my head whilst I was reading it. I was so sucked into the world that, you know, it kind of eclipsed part of my brain a bit. I do remember I just finished, for anybody who has read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. I just finished the scene, I think, in the library when they're adults. And I had to take the dog out for his bedtime walk. We don't have a garden, so I have to take him round the village so that he'll do his business. And I just popped out of our little street, which is a little lane, and I turned to look across the little road in our village, and a single balloon floated out of a little side street, and then just hung in the middle of the road, just underneath like a railway bridge that's near us. And I had to, like, you know, kind of pull myself out of kind of the fear element of it, because I'd got the timing of it was perfect. But I saw this balloon, and oh my goodness, my heart. That sort of thing. When I get that sucked in, that my immediate reaction is like fear. That, you know, I know I'm enjoying something. I know I'm reading a good book. There are a couple of issues I have with it, like I like the turtle stuff, for anybody who's, you know, again, who's read it. Just what Stephen? And I hate that scene, that unnecessary scene towards the end. But, you know, it's a massive book, and that scene is such a tiny portion of it that whilst it always kind of makes me go, oh, Stephen, no. You know, when I read it, I can't discount what the rest of the book does for me because of that. The rest of it is just such a fantastic book to me that it's still going to end up high up on my list. In at number 2 is Project Hail Mary, which was my favourite book of last year, that I read last year, and shot very quickly high up onto my all-time favourites. So it follows Ryland Grace, who, when we meet him, he's just woken up on a spaceship, but he can't remember his own name, why he's there, where he is, why he's there, what he's meant to be doing. And as the story goes on, we find out more about his mission in the present, and he's what's led up to him being there. As he gets his memory back, we get the flashbacks. So yes, it's kind of a bit of a sci-fi mystery puzzle box. Really, it's a puzzle box of a book. It's all about him figuring out the challenges and what he's going to do with them, and kind of sciencing his way out of it. It's one of those where I picked it up on a whim, and kind of thought, oh, yeah, it might be all right, and just fell in love with it within the first couple of chapters. I think I just really loved the writing style. It was an audio book, and the narration by Ray Porter is just stellar. So yeah, it's got. I love the characters in it. It's got some fantastic characters. Grace is really dry and funny, but really likable. Flawed but likable. Then you've got Strat, who's one of the kind of the leader of the mission that we find out through flashbacks about what Strat's kind of position is. Strat's hilarious, extremely sarcastic. I won't give too much away if people haven't read it, but there is one other character in it who Grace forms a very significant friendship with, who is just amazing. I love that friendship so much. I found it so funny, that book in general. It's got some fantastic lines in it, some jokes, if you like. It's sometimes it's really dry, sometimes it's absurd, sometimes it's just silly. It's kind of grounded in science enough for you to be able to kind of suspend your disbelief. It uses actual known science to kind of speculate and project on the kind of science fiction side of things, which is for me the test of the sort of science fiction I like. I'm not so much a fan of kind of sort of space operas and kind of stuff that's way outside of our realm of kind of existence. I like the stuff that's kind of a little bit more kind of I can believe that it might just be a few years into the future and we can get there. It's a really poignant story as well. It did bring me to tears, kind of through sort of sadness as well as laughter, mostly through laughter. I did have to consciously keep the noise down when I was listening to it late at night. My wife had gone to bed so that I didn't wake her up laughing out loud. It's really well paced. It's a very snappy book, definitely. And it's one of those where it has a really satisfying ending for me, because I was a little worried when I was reading it. I was thinking, this is great, I love this, but please don't fall down at the end. And it didn't. I absolutely loved the ending. It's just one of those, it's a big warm hug of a book that I shall listen to over and over again. Have started it again. And I only read it in November last year or something. But yeah, I wondered whether I'd enjoy it as much the second time around. Once I kind of knew the little twists and turns already and knew what was coming. But yeah, it's still brilliant. I still love it. It will definitely be one that I will listen to again and again and again. So last one, and in at number one as my all-time favourite fiction book ever so far is The Passage by Justin Cronin. I love this book so much. This has given me, since I first read it, so much joy. I've lost track of how many times I've read it, and I also have it on audiobook now as well, so I've listened to it. It's just, I don't think any book has really captured me in the same way that this did. The second and third in the trilogy I enjoyed immensely, but this was just one that stole my heart. It's kind of elements of horror, fantasy, post-apocalyptic stuff, dystopian stuff, adventure. It's got bits of everything in it, which is another reason why I love it. I don't know any of Justin Cronin's other work. I think he wrote, he's mainly written sort of literary fiction. So the story, very briefly, follows the outbreak of a deadly virus. It turns people into virals, they're called in this, but they are essentially vampiric. But they're a very different sort of vampire. Don't think vampires when you think this. It is not. It's not your traditional vampire. It follows a huge cast of characters over sort of 2 timelines, and it looks, it's set, primarily in the US, just before, just after, and then 100 plus years into the future after the outbreak, and it is an epic tale, especially when you consider that it goes across the three books. It's kind of another one of these epic quests. This one, it's there's a lot of kind of walking and encountering adventures and challenges and stuff like that. The world building in this, I absolutely love. The lore, the backstory, all of that kind of stuff. It's really well described. I could imagine it, and it's one of those where I was like, oh right, okay. So if I go and like plot this and be able to plot it on a map, on a modern day map, from where they start to where they kind of end up in terms of the main sort of group of characters who go on the main sort of quest. I can trace, I can kind of find the route through the US and kind of look at the terrain and things like that. So I can kind of imagine more of what Justin Cronin's kind of talking about when he talks about different areas that they're travelling through. I like the concept of the virals, because I do like vampire stuff, but some of it gets a bit old hat sometimes, and I really like the concept of this. The way that it's used. I like the multiple timelines, which sometimes I don't like, to be honest. Sometimes it's one of those things where if it jumps about a bit too much, I kind of lose it a little bit. To be honest, I wondered whether I was actually going to get on with this when I first read it, because the first section of the book, in which I fell in love entirely with the characters within that first timeline. That's all kind of like just before the outbreak, and then kind of up to sort of a year afterwards, and then it switches and it catapults you like 100 years into the future, and a whole new set of characters, and essentially a whole new society. And I kind of went, oh no, where have my characters gone? And kind of, it was really, to me, it was kind of jarring. But then I gave it a chance. I kind of almost stopped reading, and thank God I didn't. And yeah, it was one where it jarred me a little bit because I didn't expect it. But it was absolutely the right way to play it. So yeah, it does. It doesn't jump about much, but there is quite a big, dividing point in it. And it is a fantastic start to a good trilogy. I do love the trilogy, but as I say, this one stole my heart, and is the reason why I will now read pretty much anything that Justin Cronin puts out. And he's got something out, I think, in May this year, which is already on pre-order on Audible. So yeah, but yes, that is my absolute number one. It's gonna take a flipping good book to knock this one off the top spot for me. And this one was one of those surprises. I was browsing in a bookshop. They had some like little, kind of printed excerpts, basically, a nice little sort of glossy first chapter, kind of, read this and see what you think kind of thing. And so I picked it up, just kind of go, oh, it's a freebie, let's see what that's like. And read it and kind of, oh, what's this? So then, when it released, came back and went back and bought it. And yeah, just love it. It's just one of those for me. And I don't see it talked about a huge amount. So I wonder whether I'm an outlier on that my love for it is that strong. But I don't care because it's mine. So yes, so that is my number one. So that is my top 10 favourite fiction books. up until now, I have to say, my kind of reading is somewhat narrow, I think, for my age. You know, I'm in my 40s and I haven't read a huge amount, but that will change. Over the last 2 years, I've read loads more than I ever have done before, and I'm reading a lot more, you know, generally. So I'm sure that that list will change, but that's kind of one reason why I thought I'd do this. You know, it's nice to, I'm only just, you know, really starting on BookTube, and it'd be nice to have kind of a benchmark. You know, this is where I am now, and then once I've, you know, read loads more, I'm sure that the top 10 will change. So yes, it's the top 10 for now, subject to change. Next week I shall be doing my top 10 non-fiction books. So if you're interested in that, maybe consider subscribing. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider giving us a like. Thank you very much for watching. I will be back very soon with more ramblings on all things bookish. But from me, for now, that's ta-ra.